The letter arrived with the scent of pressed violets, the handwriting so familiar that my hands trembled before I even broke the seal. "Dearest Eleanor," it began, "I am to be wed." The words felt heavier than the parchment they were written on. Catherine Ashworth, soon to be Catherine Ashworth no longer, was getting married, and she wanted me by her side. Not merely as a guest, not hidden behind a fan in the pews, but as her maid of honor. It should have been a joyful invitation, one met with elation and pride, but instead, my heart twisted. For years, Catherine had been more than a friend, more than a companion. We had grown together like vines on the same trellis, reaching toward the same sun, curling around one another until we could no longer tell where one ended and the other began. Now she would be married. To a man. To Lord William Ashworth, no less, a man 3 decades her senior, known more for his estates than his conversation. I knew what this union meant: protection for her family, a name preserved, debts erased. But what did it mean for her? And for us? I arrived at the Ashworth estate 3 days before the wedding, the air thick with anticipation and imported perfume. Servants rushed through the halls carrying fine linens and candied almonds. The drawing rooms echoed with the clinking of crystal and the clipped tones of society matrons. Yet when I saw her, truly saw her, standing beneath the wisteria arbor in the East Garden, alone and barefoot in the morning dew, it was as if no time had passed. Catherine turned at the sound of my footsteps, her eyes wide and glassy, her hands clasped tightly before her. "Eleanor," she breathed, and suddenly she was in my arms, soft silk and wild roses, her face buried in my shoulder like we were girls again. "You came?" "Of course I did," I whispered. "How could I not?" She pulled back just enough to look at me, her expression unreadable. "I feared you might not, that it would be too difficult." "It is," I said honestly, and her lips parted, but no words came. We did not speak of love. We never had. But it lingered between us in every silence, every glance, every moment stolen behind hedgerows and heavy curtains. That first day was a blur of fittings and flower arrangements, of meeting the distant cousins and inspecting the silverware. But that night, in the quiet of her bedchamber lit only by candlelight, she asked me to unlace her gown, just as I had done countless times before. My fingers trembled against the silk-covered buttons. Her skin beneath was porcelain and warm, and when she turned to face me in only her chemise, the air left my lungs entirely. "Do you ever think of it?" she asked softly, almost a whisper. "Of what we were?" I met her gaze, heart pounding. "We still are." She looked away then, her jaw tight. "Not after Saturday." On the second day, Lord Ashworth arrived, tall, graying, with a face carved of stern stone. He spoke little, observed much. He looked at Catherine as one might assess a painting at auction. She smiled for him, but it never reached her eyes. That night, I found her again in the garden, moonlight painting her in silver. "Will you walk with me?" she asked, her arm slipping through mine as naturally as breathing. We wandered in silence, the only sound the crunch of gravel and the distant hoot of an owl. "When we were 16, she said, "do you remember the poem you read me? The one about the woman who waited on the shore?" "The Lady of Shalott," I said. She watched from the tower, cursed to never look directly at the world. "And she chose to look anyway," Catherine said, "even knowing it would kill her." I stopped walking. "Are you saying this marriage is a curse?" She turned to me, eyes shining. "No. I'm saying I'm tired of looking through mirrors. I wanted to hold her, to kiss her, to say the words I had buried for years. But we were still in the world, and the world was watching. The third day brought more guests, more attention. Her mother spoke endlessly of dowries and honor, her father of alliances and duty. But Catherine and I clung to every moment alone, every brush of fingers, every shared glance across a crowded room. On the final evening before the wedding, she brought me to her childhood bedroom, smaller than the grand suites, tucked away in the west wing where no one ventured. It still held our old books, our pressed flowers, our secrets. We sat on the bed, knees touching, the past between us like smoke. "I don't want to lose you," she said. "Then don't," I replied. "It's not that simple." "It never is," I whispered. She leaned closer then, our breaths mingling, our foreheads touching. "If I asked you," she said, voice barely audible, "to run, would you?" I didn't answer. I couldn't, because the weight of what she was asking was too great. But I didn't pull away, and she didn't kiss me. Not yet. Morning arrived with the solemn weight of tradition, the household waking in a frenzy of preparations while I lingered alone by the window in my guest room, watching the fog lift from the rolling hills of Ashworth Estate. Servants rushed below with linens and silver trays, the scent of baking bread and lavender wafting through the halls, but none of it touched the storm inside me. Catherine and I had barely spoken since that final whisper in the old bedroom. She had left me there with a question that unraveled every thread I had worked so hard to keep neat. "If I asked you to run, would you?" My heart had answered, but my mouth had not. And now, the hours bled forward with cruel purpose. I saw her again in the drawing room, her posture perfect in pale blue muslin, her smile fixed like porcelain. Her mother hovered beside her, arranging lace gloves and chiding the seamstress for an uneven hem. I stood across the room, close enough to smell the roses woven into Catherine's hair, too far to reach her hand. "Eleanor," she said at last, breaking through the buzz of voices and expectation. "Would you accompany me to the chapel? I'd like to rehearse the steps once more." Her mother began to object, but Catherine's gaze was unflinching. "Alone, if you please." And somehow, we were walking together again, past the sun-drenched corridor, through the chapel doors, into the hush of stone and stained glass and heavy air. The pews were empty, the altar bare. She stood at the end of the aisle, looking small beneath the carved wooden arches. "Do you believe in fate?" she asked without turning. "No," I said, "but I believe in choices." She turned to me, something wild in her eyes. "Then tell me, Eleanor, what would you choose if there were no consequences?" I walked to her, each step echoing like a vow. "I would choose you." Her breath hitched, her hands tightening around her gloves. "Even if it meant shame? Exile?" "Yes," I said, my voice low. "Even if it meant ruin." She stared at me, trembling. "You should not say such things." "And yet," I murmured, "I do." She stepped closer, the distance between us shrinking into nothing, and for one suspended moment, I thought she would kiss me here, in the house of God, in defiance of heaven itself. But instead, she reached for my hand, held it tightly, and said, "Meet me tonight. After the rehearsal dinner. My chambers." I nodded, heart thundering. That evening, the house glittered with candlelight and crystal. Guests paraded through the dining hall in silks and jewels, exchanging shallow compliments and calculated smiles. I sat beside Catherine at the long table, our shoulders almost touching, our words guarded by the presence of her fiancé 2 seats away. Lord Ashworth was dignified and dull, speaking of Parliament and land, his voice a drone beneath which I heard only the rhythm of Catherine's breathing. Her fingers brushed mine beneath the table once, just once, and the shock of it nearly made me drop my glass. When the final toast was raised and the guests retired to their rooms or the smoking parlor, I waited precisely 10 minutes before slipping away. Her chambers were dark but unlocked. I entered quietly, hard in my throat, and found her standing by the window, her silhouette lit only by the moon. "You came," she said without turning. "Of course I did." She turned then, barefoot, her dressing gown loose around her shoulders. "I keep thinking," she said, "that tomorrow everything ends. Whatever we are ends." I stepped forward. "Only if we let it." Her chin quivered. "I don't want to be a wife. Not to him. Not to anyone but—" She stopped herself. I closed the distance. "Then don't be." "It's not that simple," she whispered. "There's no life for people like us." "Then we'll make one," I said. "Even if the world never sees it. Even if we live it only in moments." Her hand reached for mine. Fingers laced. "Is that enough for you?" You are enough for me. She pulled me into her arms, and for the first time in years, I felt home. Her lips hovered near mine, breath shallow, but she didn't move. If I kiss you, she whispered, I may never be able to stop. Then kiss me, I said, before they take you away. Her mouth met mine with desperation and fire, a kiss that felt like a rebellion, like a secret shouted into the night. Her hands framed my face, mine clutched the back of her neck, and in that room, the world ceased to matter. We broke apart only when footsteps echoed in the corridor, and she pressed her forehead to mine, breathless. Tomorrow, she said, I will marry him, but tonight, I am yours. And for the first time, I feared what dawn would bring. The hours before dawn passed in aching silence, our bodies pressed together in the dark as if sheer proximity could keep the sun from rising. Catherine slept lightly, her breathing shallow, one arm draped over my waist as though she feared I might disappear. I lay awake, tracing the curve of her shoulder with my fingertips, memorizing every inch of skin I would not be allowed to touch again. Outside, the birds began to stir, and with them, reality. When the first rays of morning bled through the curtains, she stirred, blinking slowly before looking at me with a softness that shattered me. Good morning, she whispered. Is it? I asked, my voice raw. It feels like goodbye. She didn't answer. Instead, she leaned in, pressed a tender kiss to my collarbone, and then slipped from the bed. I watched her dress in silence, the silk of her robe clinging to her hips, her fingers trembling slightly as she tied the sash. She paused by the door, her back to me. I have to be seen, she said. They'll be looking. I nodded, throat tight. Go. She left without another word. I lay there for what felt like hours before forcing myself to rise. The wedding was in less than a day. Every minute we wasted pretending cost us pieces of ourselves. I found her in the rose garden later that morning, speaking to a florist about arrangements. Her expression was composed, polite, the perfect bride. But her eyes found mine across the hedges and held. She came to me an hour later, alone in the library, where dust motes floated through golden light and the scent of old leather bound us in memory. I can't stop thinking about last night, she said. Nor can I whispered. Then tell me what to do, Eleanor. I beg you, tell me how to live with this. I reached for her hand, warm and trembling. You already know how. You're just afraid. Wouldn't you be? I am, I said, stepping closer. But not of loving you, only of never being allowed to. She blinked rapidly. I thought I could do it. Smile. Nod. Walk down the aisle. But the closer it gets, the more I feel like I'm suffocating. Then breathe, I said. Run. And go where? With what? With me, I whispered. We'll figure the rest out later. She looked at me like I was sunlight and salvation, and then someone knocked at the door. We jumped apart. A maid. Miss Eleanor, the seamstress, is ready for the final fitting. I'll be along shortly, I said, voice steady. The girl left. Catherine exhaled. They're watching us more closely now. My mother suspects something. Let them watch, I said. Let them see what they never taught us to name. That evening, the rehearsal dinner was even more suffocating than the last. Catherine sat beside Lord Ashworth, who rested a possessive hand on hers throughout the meal. She smiled at him, laughed at the right moments, played her role so well I almost believed it, until she looked at me, just once, and her eyes betrayed everything. I excused myself early. I couldn't bear it. I went to the music room, dark and abandoned, and sat at the piano we used to play as girls. I touched the keys, but didn't press them. My hands shook too much. A moment later, I felt her enter. I didn't have to look. You disappeared, she said. I had no place at that table. She sat beside me, our shoulders brushing. I want to say I'm sorry, but I don't know what for. For kissing you? For needing you? For pretending I don't matter, I said. Even as you shatter me with every look. You do matter, she said. You are the only thing that matters. But I don't know how to choose you without destroying everything. Then destroy it, I said. Or live a life that isn't yours. She was quiet. Then, would you really leave with me? I'd leave this second. Her breath caught. Her hand found mine in the dark. Tonight. Meet me in the stables. If I don't come, you'll know my choice. But if I do, then we ride. I finished. She nodded, eyes glistening. At midnight. She slipped away again, leaving me in silence. And all I could do was pray that the next time I saw her, she would be running toward me, not away. Midnight came like a whisper through the trees, the estate cloaked in velvet darkness, the last embers of candlelight flickering behind high windows as the world settled into uneasy sleep. I moved through the shadowed halls like a thief, heart pounding with every step, my slippers silent against the stone floors. I had worn a simple riding dress, dark and unadorned, with my cloak drawn tight around me and my hair braided back, not for beauty, but for speed. Love what you've seen so far and want to help me keep creating these awesome stories on this channel? Then subscribe and hit the bell. Your subscription supports the channel and makes sure you get more exciting stories. The wind outside bit through the layers as I slipped past the hedges and across the damp grass toward the stables, each breath sharp in my lungs, each footstep a prayer. She would come. She had to. I reached the stables and pushed the door open slowly, the scent of hay and horses thick in the air. The lantern I had lit hours earlier still burned faintly in the corner, casting long golden shadows across the floor. I waited and waited. Every creak of the old wood, every distant hoot of an owl made my heart leap and crash again. I sat on a bale of hay, hands clasped tight in my lap, staring at the door until my eyes stung. Minutes passed, then more. My throat tightened. My hope cracked. Perhaps she wouldn't come. Perhaps she couldn't. I thought of her standing before her mirror, dress half-buttoned, duty pounding at the door, fear digging into her ribs. I thought of her father, her mother, the ring on her finger. I thought of Lord Ashworth and his name and his promises and his power. I stood, fighting the tears that blurred my vision, and turned toward the door, ready to leave, ready to let her go, when I heard it. The sound of hooves on wet grass. I froze. The door swung open, and there she was, Catherine, breathless, cloak trailing behind her, hair in disarray, eyes wild and full of fire. You came, I said, voice breaking. So did you, she whispered, stepping inside. She reached for me without hesitation, pulling me into her arms, her mouth crashing into mine in a kiss that tasted of tears and rain and desperation. We clung to each other in the dim light, the outside world dissolving into nothing. I couldn't sleep, she said. I couldn't breathe. I tried to forget, tried to convince myself that marrying him was the right thing, the only thing, but all I saw was you. Your eyes. Your voice. Your hand reaching for mine. I'd rather be ruined with you than praised without you. I kissed her again, fiercely, and this time she didn't hesitate. We moved through the stables in a flurry of motion, pulling saddles from the racks, fastening cloaks, adjusting stirrups with shaking hands. The horses snorted and shifted, sensing the urgency in us. Do you know where we'll go? She asked as she led her mare to the courtyard. North, I said. There's a town beyond the hills. We'll find passage to Scotland. We'll be no one. And we'll be free. Free, she echoed, as if tasting the word for the first time. The night wrapped around us as we mounted, the wind howling through the trees, and for a moment, I thought the stars above might split open from the weight of what we were doing. We rode hard, the hooves pounding like thunder, our cloaks billowing behind us, hearts hammering against ribs that no longer held fear but fire. The estate disappeared behind us. The trees closed in. The road was dark, but we knew the way. And still, even with all that courage in our bones, even with her fingers brushing mine as we galloped side by side, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone would follow. That someone already had. We rode through the night, through darkness so thick it seemed to press against our skin, the only sounds the pounding of hooves and the ragged breaths we drew between gusts of wind that tore at our cloaks. The road was rough and narrow, winding through hedgerows and past sleeping farms, and every creak of saddle leather felt like a shout in the silence. Catherine kept close beside me, her mare trembling beneath her, and once or twice I reached out to steady her reins, afraid she'd fall from sheer exhaustion or fear. Neither of us spoke for hours. There was nothing to say. We had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed, had become fugitives not only from society, but from the very lives we had been raised to accept without question. Somewhere past the 3rd mile, the moon broke free of the clouds, casting ghostly light across the trees, and I glanced over to find Catherine's face streaked with tears. I said nothing. I couldn't. I feared that if I opened my mouth, I might begin to weep as well, and never stop. Just before dawn, we found a narrow path that led through a thicket and into a hollow where an old stone shepherd's cottage stood half hidden by ivy. It looked abandoned, roof sagging slightly, windows dusty, but the door opened with a groan, and the hearth inside still held the faint scent of ash and old smoke. We dismounted with trembling limbs and led the horses into the small barn beside the cottage, offering them what little dry hay we could find. Then we stepped inside, the cold biting deeper now that we were no longer moving, and closed the door behind us. The silence was thick. Catherine sank onto the bench beside the hearth, burying her face in her hands. I knelt before her, gently pulling the damp curls from her cheeks. "Are you hurt?" I asked. She shook her head. "Only afraid." I took her hands. "So am I." She looked up at me, eyes rimmed red. "What if they find us?" "Then we run again," I said. "And if we can't, then we face it together." Her lips quivered. "I don't regret it. Any of it." "Nor do I." I lit the hearth with the flint I found near the kindling, and soon the fire flickered weakly, casting our shadows across the worn stone walls. We sat huddled beside it, cloaks wrapped tight around our bodies, steam rising slowly from our damp clothes as the warmth returned to our fingers. I looked at her then, really looked, and saw the girl I had loved for so long. Not in secret anymore, not behind closed doors or whispered words. Here she was, stripped of pearls and protocol, trembling and raw and more beautiful than ever. "I never imagined I'd do something like this," she said softly. "Defy my family, run for my own wedding, ruin everything they built for me." "You didn't ruin anything," I said. "You chose something else. Something real." "But what kind of life is this?" she asked. "Hiding? Running?" "It's our life," I whispered, brushing a lock of hair from her brow. "It's not perfect. It may not even be safe. But it's ours." She leaned into me then, slowly, and when our lips met it was not frantic like before, not desperate. It was quiet. Certain. A promise. When we broke apart, she rested her head against my shoulder. "Will you stay awake?" she murmured. "Just for a while. I feel safer knowing you're watching." "Always," I whispered, kissing her temple. She drifted off then, curled against me like a child, and I sat staring into the fire, my thoughts churning. How long could we stay here? Would they send riders? Would her father, humiliated and furious, call upon the law or worse, his connections in Parliament, the whispers that reached every corner of the country? And what if they caught us? What punishment awaited women who ran not only from duty, but toward one another? I held her tighter, the fire crackling low, and promised myself I would not let them take her. Not again. The sun rose slowly, casting pale light through the small, cracked windows. We had only the clothes on our backs, no coin, no plan beyond escape. I knew we had to move before word spread too far. But for now, just for this moment, we were safe. Together. Alive. A soft knock shattered the silence. 3 gentle raps on the wooden door. My breath caught. Catherine stirred in my arms. I stood slowly, heart pounding, and crossed the door. I pressed my ear to the wood. Silence. I opened it an inch. A woman stood there, wrapped in a dark cloak, her hood pulled low. I could not see her face. "Are you the ones from Ashworth?" she asked. Her voice was calm, precise. "Who wants to know?" I said, keeping my hand near the hearth poker. The woman tilted her head. Someone who can help you, if you want to disappear. Behind me, Catherine rose, eyes wide. Who is it? I don't know, I whispered. But somehow, in that moment, I believed her. And I feared her. Because if someone already knew where we were, then so did others. She stepped forward without waiting for an invitation, her cloak trailing behind her like a shadow, and I stood frozen by the doorway, torn between slamming it shut and letting her speak. I don't mean to frighten you, she said, voice calm, eyes sharp beneath the hood. But if I found you, others will soon. Catherine moved to stand beside me, her fingers brushing mine. Who are you? I asked, more steel in my voice than I expected. The woman pulled back her hood. She was in her 40s, perhaps, with dark hair streaked in silver and eyes that held something unreadable, grief, perhaps, or knowledge earned at a cost. My name is Margaret Hale, she said. I was once Lady Margaret of Wycliffe. Before I left everything behind. My blood ran cold. I knew the name. Everyone did. Years ago, Lady Margaret vanished from society in a scandal so deep no one dared speak of it plainly. Whispers said she'd run off with a governess. Others claimed madness. But she had been the eldest daughter of a powerful house until she vanished. Why are you here? I asked. Because I heard what you did, she said, her gaze flicking to Catherine. And I thought you might need someone who understands. Catherine took a step forward. You mean you know? I know what it is to love in secret, Margaret said. And to run. And to be hunted. She moved slowly to the hearth, warming her hands. You'll need new names. New clothes. A place to rest before the border. We were going to head north, I said. Scotland. A fine choice, she replied. But you won't make it there alone. Not without help. Not now that they're looking. I hesitated. How do we know we can trust you? Margaret looked at me then, and there was no pretense in her voice. You don't. But I trust that look in your eyes. The one that says you'd rather burn with her than live without her. I remember it well. Catherine's hand found mine again. She leaned in, whispering, I think she's telling the truth. I nodded slowly. Margaret stepped back from the fire. I have a cottage. 2 days' ride west. Secluded. Off the maps. No one will find you there, if you're careful. Why are you helping us? I asked. Because once someone helped me, she said simply. And because I've lived in silence for too long. Maybe you two don't have to. We left that afternoon, slipping away before the next shadows could follow. Margaret rode with us, her horse black as coal, her eyes always scanning the trees behind us. We didn't speak much. There was no need. Catherine rode between us, her posture stiff, her cheeks pink from the cold, but her eyes brighter than they had been in weeks. That night, we camped near the edge of a forest. Margaret built a small fire, quiet and efficient. Catherine and I sat close together beneath one blanket, the sky wide and endless above us. Do you believe her? Catherine asked softly. I do, I said. And even if I didn't, I believe in you. She turned to me, her face bathed in firelight. I've never believed in anything the way I believe in you. I kissed her then, slow and tender, and for a moment the fear melted away. We weren't fugitives. We were simply two women, in love under the stars. Later that night, after Catherine had fallen asleep beside me, I rose and found Margaret sitting alone, sharpening a knife. You expect trouble? I asked. She didn't look up. I expect your fiancé's men are already riding, with orders not to return empty-handed. He wouldn't hurt her, I said. Margaret met my eyes. A man like Lord Ashworth doesn't see women as people, only possessions. You stole something he believes is his. He'll come. I felt the air leave my lungs. And what do we do? You stay hidden, she said. You move when I say move. You trust no one but each other. I returned to Catherine and pulled her close, unable to sleep. I thought of the wedding she had left behind, the guests who whispered, the father who raged, The man who now hunted us. We had run from the world. But the world, it seemed, was running after us. The rain came before morning, steady and cold, turning the path ahead to thick, clinging mud that slowed our horses and soaked through every layer we wore. Margaret led us deeper into the woods, her eyes sharp beneath her hood, and Catherine rode close beside me, her hands white-knuckled on the reins, her silence louder than anything. We had ridden all night, stopping only once to water the horses, and now exhaustion clung to our bones like fog. Not much farther, Margaret said as we crested a hill, the distant edge of a dark forest visible through the trees. We reached the river by midday. Then the safe house. I nodded, but something in the air shifted, something heavy and unnatural. The birds had gone quiet. The wind dropped. Even the horses seemed to feel it, their ears flicking back. Margaret halted suddenly and held up a hand. Off the path. Now. We obeyed without question, leading the horses into a thicket and crouching low behind a wall of brambles and damp stone. Moments later, the sound came. Hooves. Not just one or two, but many. 10, maybe 12. Galloping fast. Uniform. Controlled. A search party. Catherine's eyes met mine, wide with terror. I pressed a finger to her lips and held her close, barely daring to breathe as the riders thundered past the path we'd just left. I recognized the crest on the banner one of them carried. Lord Ashworth's men. Margaret waited until the last echo of hooves faded, then slowly stood. They're sweeping this whole area. We need to move. No more roads. We walked the horses now, through narrow gaps in trees and over moss-covered rocks, ducking beneath branches and wading through freezing streams that numbed our feet and soaked our hems. The rain never stopped. By the time we reached the river, Catherine was trembling, and I had to wrap my arm around her waist to keep her upright. "I'm fine," she said, even as her lips turned pale. "Just tired." "We're almost there," I whispered, though I didn't know if it was true. Margaret found a small outcrop of stone nestled against the riverbank where we could rest, half-sheltered from the rain. She left to scout ahead, promising to return before dusk. Catherine and I sat on a flat rock, wrapped in the same cloak, our bodies pressed for warmth. I held her close, rubbing her hands between mine. "Tell me something beautiful," she said. "Anything. Just not about the rain." I thought for a moment. "The day you kissed me beneath the orchard tree, you smelled of lilacs and ink. I remember thinking I would carry that scent with me forever." Her eyes fluttered closed. "And I remember thinking it would be the only moment in my life that ever truly belonged to me." I kissed her temple. "This one belongs to you too." Before she could answer, we heard it. A rustle. A branch snapping. A breath too close. I turned sharply. Figures emerging from the trees. At least 3. Maybe more. Armed. Not riders. Men on foot, dressed in dark coats, boots caked with mud. They had found our trail. "Run," I whispered, grabbing Catherine's hand. We fled uphill, ducking under low branches, mud slick beneath our boots, the river to our right, and only forest ahead. I heard one of the men shout, but I didn't look back. Catherine stumbled once, falling to her knees, and I pulled her up, ignoring the pain in my chest, the tear in my skirt. "There," she gasped, pointing to a fallen tree. We slipped beneath it, hearts pounding, faces streaked with rain and fear. Silence fell again. Then a voice low, close. "Lady Catherine, come home." Lord Ashworth. I felt her hand tighten in mine, her whole body rigid. I could see his boots just beyond the trunk, mud-covered, inches from where we lay. "You've had your little adventure," he said, calm and cruel. "But it ends now. You belong with me." She trembled beside me, silent. "Do not make me drag you from the arms of that," he spat the word, companion. I heard his boots turn. "You have one chance, Catherine. Come out now, and I will forgive the foolishness. Marry me, and all will be forgotten. Stay hidden, and you'll both be ruined." The silence that followed was suffocating. I could feel her indecision like a pulse. She looked at me, her eyes filled with something deeper than fear, love. And then she did the unthinkable. She stood. I grabbed her arm, but she whispered, "Trust me." She stepped over the fallen trunk, soaked, disheveled, her cloak torn, her chin high. "You no longer own me," she said. "Not my body, not my name, and certainly not my future." Ashworth took one step forward. "You would disgrace your family for her?" Catherine nodded. "I would burn the whole estate to the ground for her." And then Margaret's voice cut through the air like thunder. "Step away from the lady, or I swear by every breath left in my body, I'll put an arrow through your throat." From the trees, Margaret emerged, bow drawn, eyes blazing. The men flinched. Ashworth hesitated. One breath. Two. Then he turned. "This isn't over." "It is," Catherine said. "It was over the moment you thought I'd ever be yours." And just like that, he was gone. But I knew he wouldn't stop. Not until he had what he thought was his. Or until one of us was destroyed. We didn't speak for hours after we fled. The only sounds were the clop of hooves on uneven ground and the rasp of breath caught too often in our throats. Margaret rode ahead in silence, scanning the trees with her bow still strapped to her back, while Catherine and I rode side by side, barely able to look at each other, as if speaking aloud would make what had just happened feel real. I could still hear his voice in my ears, that cold certainty, the threat thinly veiled beneath civility. But louder than that was her answer. I would burn the whole estate to the ground for her. She had chosen. And we had survived, for now. It was nearly dusk when Margaret led us off the road and through a narrow trail that dipped between hills, the trees growing taller, older, until finally we emerged into a clearing that felt untouched by time. At its center stood a cottage built of stone and ivy, low-roofed, half swallowed by nature but solid, safe. Smoke rose faintly from the chimney. "This was my mother's," Margaret said, dismounting. "She passed before the scandal. No one remembers it belongs to me." Catherine nearly fell as she got off her horse, and I rushed to catch her, my arms steadying her waist, feeling her weight collapse into me like breath after drowning. "I'm fine," she whispered, but I could feel the tremble in her knees. "You're exhausted. So are you. But I'm not the one who stood up to a monster and lived." She let out a weak laugh, and I kissed her forehead before helping her inside. The cottage was small but warm, fire already crackling in the hearth. Margaret gave us clean linens, simple dresses, a basin of water to wash. She left us alone without a word, retreating to the outer room and closing the door gently behind her. Catherine sat on the edge of the small bed, her fingers gripping the edge of her skirt, her hair loose and wild around her shoulders. "He would have dragged me back," she said, staring into the flames. "He would have made me a prisoner in my own home." I knelt in front of her, placing my hands on hers. "But he didn't. You stopped him. You saved us." She looked down at me. "No, you saved me. You always have." I brought her hands to my lips, kissed each trembling knuckle, then rested my cheek against them. "I was so afraid," she whispered. "I thought if I stood up to him, I'd break. But I didn't. Because I kept thinking of you. Of how you look at me like I'm something worth saving. And I wanted to be that. For you." I looked up at her, eyes burning. "You are everything. Do you understand? You are not the ruin. You are the rescue." She leaned down, her forehead against mine. "Will it always feel like this?" "Like what? Like the whole world is waiting to punish us for loving each other?" I swallowed. "Maybe. But they'll never know what it feels like to be held the way you hold me. And I would rather be hunted every day of my life than give that up." She kissed me then, slow and deep, and it felt different this time. Not stolen, not panicked, but chosen. It was the kind of kiss that rewrites everything. That tells the body, this is what it's meant to be touched like. We moved together slowly, tenderly, fingers brushing skin like pages we had waited years to read. I unlaced the back of her dress as she unfastened mine, breath mingling, lips never far, and when she lay back on the small bed, pulling me down with her, it was not with fear, but reverence. The fire cracked gently, shadows dancing along the stone walls, and our bodies found rhythm in the silence. Every sigh was a promise, every gasp a confession. When we finally stilled, breathless and tangled, I rested my head on her chest, listening to her heartbeat like a hymn. She stroked my hair in slow circles. I want to wake up next to you, every day. Not just in hiding, not just in fear. Then we'll find a way, I said. We'll make a life. Somewhere quiet, somewhere safe. Will there ever be such a place? I lifted my head. There is now. Because you're in it. She kissed me again, smiling against my lips, and for the first time since this began, it didn't feel like we were running. It felt like we had arrived. We fell asleep in each other's arms, skins still warm from love and firelight, hearts beating in sync. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, but it no longer sounded like warning. It sounded like peace. And for one night, just one, we believed in the possibility of forever. The days that followed in the cottage passed slowly, wrapped in a fragile sense of stillness we knew better than to trust. Catherine and I spent our mornings gathering water from the stream, our afternoons tending the garden Margaret had coaxed back to life, and our nights curled together before the fire, whispering secrets we'd never dared say aloud. For the first time, we lived not in longing, but in presence. In truth. Her laughter came easier now. My touch no longer made her flinch with guilt. We kissed when we wanted, held hands without fear. And yet, beneath every smile, I felt the weight of something approaching. Something inevitable. Margaret remained cautious. She spent hours walking the perimeter of the woods, bow always slung across her back, returning each evening with that same unreadable look in her eyes. She didn't speak of Ashworth. Not directly. But we all felt the tension in her silence. Until the morning she returned with a letter in her hand and fury in her eyes. He's petitioned Parliament, she said, tossing the parchment onto the table. He's calling it a moral scandal. Says his bride was abducted. That you, she looked at me, are a corrupting influence. A threat to noble bloodlines. Catherine paled. What does that mean? It means, Margaret said, he's using his position and money to turn your love into a public offense. He wants Eleanor arrested. And you returned by force. The air left the room. I sat down slowly. Can he do that? He's already trying, Margaret replied. And if the House takes it seriously, there'll be warrants. Officers. Trials. Catherine stood, jaw tight. Then we go further. We disappear again. No, Margaret said, voice firm. You've run far enough. And he will never stop if you keep giving him shadows to chase. What do you suggest? I asked, though I already saw it in her eyes. You fight him. Publicly. I shook my head. How? Who would believe us? I would, said a new voice. We turned. A woman stood in the doorway. Older, severe, wrapped in deep plum wool and a traveling cloak. Her eyes held power, the kind earned over decades of being dismissed and underestimated. Lady Hawthorne, Margaret said. You came? You summoned me, the woman replied coolly. I always repay a favor. Who is she? Catherine whispered. An ally, Margaret answered. One of the few who remembers who I was before the scandal and didn't turn away. Lady Hawthorne approached the hearth. I have connections in the courts. Friends and places Ashworth thinks belong only to him. If you want to tell your story, I can make sure the right ears hear it. And if you want to vanish, I can make that happen too. Catherine looked at me. What do you want? I swallowed. I want to stop hiding. But I don't want to lose you. Then we don't hide, she said. Not anymore. That night, as Margaret and Lady Hawthorne spoke in hushed tones by the fire, Catherine and I sat in the doorway of the cottage, watching the stars burn quietly above the treetops. I keep thinking, she said, about the day you arrived at Ashworth Hall, about how I thought I'd lost you already. And now, you're here, and I'm the one deciding what we lose and what we keep. You've always had that power, I said gently. You just didn't know it. I want to speak, she said suddenly. I want them to hear it from me.
Not you.
Not Margaret.
Me.
I looked at her, my heart splitting open in awe. Then we tell them together. She smiled, tears in her eyes. Promise me something. Anything. That no matter what happens, you'll still call me yours. I took her hand. Even if the world burns, I will still call you mine. We returned to the fire and gave Lady Hawthorne our answer. 2 days later, she arranged a meeting with a solicitor in a quiet corner of London, where Catherine would make a sworn statement. The wheels began to turn. And though I knew we were stepping into danger, I also knew one thing with absolute certainty. We were no longer running. We were rising. Together. The streets of London felt nothing like the countryside, their rhythm sharp, their breath made of soot and whispers, their eyes always watching. But we walked them anyway, Catherine's gloved hand tucked into the crook of my arm, her chin lifted, her step steady. We had arrived 2 days before the hearing, staying in a discreet townhouse under Lady Hawthorne's protection. The rooms were small, the curtains thick, the hours long. But we weren't afraid. Not anymore. Catherine had prepared her statement with a solicitor, her voice unwavering as she recounted every moment of our escape, every attempt by Ashworth to silence her, to claim her like property. I had never seen her more radiant than in that moment, speaking her truth not in secret, not in shadows, but in daylight. The press caught wind of it within hours. The Ashworth wedding scandal became the headline no one could ignore. Some papers painted us as delusional, sinful, mad. Others called Catherine brave. But most simply wanted the spectacle. That morning, we stood before a small council of men in powdered wigs and polished shoes, men who wore judgment like armor. Margaret stood behind us, Lady Hawthorne beside her. I held Catherine's hand as they called her forward. Lady Catherine Ashworth, the lead magistrate intoned, you claim you fled your wedding not due to coercion, but by choice. You claim you are not a victim of seduction or abduction, but of societal imprisonment. Is this correct? Catherine's voice rang clear. Yes, my lord. And the woman beside you, Miss Eleanor Blake, did she influence your actions? Catherine turned toward me, and I saw the fire in her eyes. She reminded me I had a choice. And I made it. Freely. Completely. I chose her. The room rustled, and I felt every eye burning against our skin. You understand, the magistrate said, that your statement defies the expectation of your station, that you risk your name, your family's fortune, and your place in society. Catherine smiled. Then I shall build a new name, and a new place, one I can live in with honesty. They questioned her for nearly an hour, about morals, about honor, about duty, but she answered each one with grace, never once denying what we were. And when it ended, and the chamber emptied, and the air turned still again, we walked out into the sunlight hand in hand. The judgment was issued quietly. No prison. No formal charges. No annulment needed, for there had been no true marriage, no vows made. Ashworth withdrew from public life days later. His name faded from the papers, his pride too bruised to recover. He would not touch us again. We remained in London for a time. The scandal cooled. The whispers faded. And Lady Hawthorne, in her infinite cunning, arranged for our names to be placed in an inheritance loophole that allowed us to claim land left to distant cousins, one of whom had vanished abroad years before. So we left. Not in shame, but in triumph. We took the estate on the northern coast, by the cliffs where the wind sings through the grass and the sea reminds you of your own smallness. There, we built a life. Quiet. Steady.
Ours.
Catherine painted. I wrote. We rode horses in the morning and read poetry by the fire at night. There were no servants. No titles. No one to tell us who we were allowed to be. We planted wildflowers. We learned to cook bread that burned often but filled the house with warmth. We made love without fear of locked doors. We laughed more than I ever thought possible. And on a spring morning, 2 years later, we stood beneath an arbor of climbing roses in the garden we'd grown with our own hands, and we vowed, softly, privately, without priest or paperwork, that we would belong to each other in this life and in all that might follow. Catherine pressed a silver ring into my hand.
It isn't a wedding, she said.
But it's a promise. I kissed her and whispered, then I swear I'll keep it until the world ends. We were no longer girls hiding behind hedgerows. No longer trembling hands in the dark. We were women who had faced the world and chosen love anyway. And in doing so, we found the one thing no one could ever take from us.
Peace.
Thank you so much for being here and for believing in this channel. If you feel in your heart, you can donate with super thanks so I can focus more and more on this project. Your support helps me keep creating these love stories and bringing them to life for you. See you in the next video.